I'm Alex, welcome to the channel and thanks for tuning in. So in today's video we're going to be talking about something which people have been asking for a while and which I've been saying I will get filmed and get uploaded as soon as possible, and here it finally is. Sorry for the delay, but today we're talking about HITID's uplisting to the NASDAQ. In this video we're going to talk about everything to do with this, what it means, how they do it, why they want to do it, and what the positives and negatives of this are. As well as this, I will touch on one thing which is really important, which I have mentioned in previous videos in relation to HITID, but which remains really important and people should be reminded of. If you're invested in HITID or interested in this stock, then you definitely don't want to miss this one. What's more, depending on when I actually get this video uploaded, there potentially is another video coming on HITID very shortly. That will be in relation to the Q4 earnings release, which is expected after hours today. If you're new to the channel and you like investing related content, then hit that subscribe button. The YouTube algorithm doesn't like my unpredictable upload schedule, and as a result, oftentimes my videos just aren't shown to people. If you want to make sure you don't miss an upload, hit that bell button and then hopefully you get notified when I upload videos. The channel also now has its own Patreon and private Discord group. If you're interested in that, then check the video in the description below and the link to the Patreon page. It's very different from others on YouTube. It's not for everyone, but I recommend checking it out if you're interested. If you like the video, please smash the like button, it's so helpful in pushing the channel to a wider audience. And as always, I'm not a financial advisor, this video is purely for educational and entertainment purposes only, but let's get straight into it. So firstly, what is an uplisting? Well, an uplisting is basically where a company is listed on one stock market, but goes through an application process to be trading on a different stock market, normally one that's superior or a main market. For example, this could be a company that's trading on the OTC and wants to move to NASDAQ. In this case, HITID is currently trading on the Toronto Stock Exchange. When HITID first listed, this made a lot of sense. It's headquartered in Canada and the majority of the business was based there. However, there are a number of reasons now as to why HITID is considering a NASDAQ uplisting. In fact, on December the 9th, HITID filed its application for an uplisting to the NASDAQ. Now, an uplisting is often a process which penny stocks go through to become an established and main market listed business. Now, this is something that a number of other cannabis stocks have done as well. Both Aphria and Aurora both have been listed on Canada and now have New York Stock Exchange listings. So in order for a company to uplist, there are a number of criteria which it has to meet. Now, HITID currently meets all of those criteria bar one. It has more than $2 million of shareholders' equity. It has over 100,000 shares. It has over 300 different shareholders. It has total assets of over $4 million and more than 2 market makers. And finally, its market cap is over $1 million. Now, the one criteria, which they don't quite meet yet, is around the stock price. Now, the uplisting requirements are that the stock price is trading at least $3. At the point of filming this, HITID is currently trading at around 70 cents. So that means without corporate action, the share price would have to increase by around 430% from the current levels to meet that. Fortunately, there are a number of corporate actions which HITID could take, which will enable them to increase this share price. And that leads us quite nicely onto how they will do this and when they will do this. Now, in order to make this possible, there are corporate actions which a management team can take. Now, it's important to remember that these don't happen overnight. They're lengthy processes which can take months and months. The important thing to remember is that once the uplisting is complete, that's not the end of the story either. The process of getting the share price to the $3 to meet that criteria is not an increase in the value of the company. The company's value will remain the same. However, once it is listed on the NASDAQ, and we'll go into this in more detail shortly, there's the potential that the company's overall valuation could increase. Ultimately, the most likely way which management will go about increasing the share price so that they meet this criteria is through a reverse stock split or a stock merger. Now, I do know some people are going to suggest that they could do a share buyback here. However, ultimately, I believe that the cash that the company would ultimately use in buying back those shares is better in the case of HITID, used to fuel further growth and invested into delivering that growth. Ultimately, when doing something like a reverse stock split, you don't use that cash and you keep it for the growth. Ultimately, a reverse stock split or a stock merger is a process where a company merges the number of shares it has and decreases them. It ultimately doesn't impact the company's overall valuation at all, but does change the share price. Let me walk you through an example. Say a company has 1,000 shares, all of those which are worth $1 each. That company could undertake a 2-for-1 reverse stock split. That would ultimately mean that for every 2 shares that someone held, that share got merged into 1. In that example, the company would be left with 500 shares, each of which would be worth $2 each. In the case of HITID, it would be using the same principles at a larger scale. Now, what's important to remember here is that doesn't change the overall market capitalization of the company, just the share price. Currently, HITID has just over 510 million shares. So for example, they could do a 5-for-1 reverse stock split merger. That would give them over 100 million shares outstanding and a stock price of around $3.50. Now, I'm not saying that that's exactly the ratio they'll go for. However, I would expect it to be somewhere between 5-for-1 and 10-for-1. And ultimately, through that process, they would then have increased the share price while not changing the company's valuation, but met the final criteria they need to be eligible for the uplisting. Now, ultimately, there's a lot of work that goes into this. As we know with HITID, there are a number of instruments which are dilutive. All of these things which often have target prices and similar things associated with them when they vest. The work then needs to go into understanding what the new ratio that they can be dilutive at is, and ultimately what the price would be. So, when could this happen? Well, as we discussed earlier, the application for the uplisting was filed on the 9th of December. Ultimately with these things, there's no timeline set in stone. They'll need the support of various advisors, investment bankers, lawyers, other sorts of advisors to go through this process, and that all takes time. Over the last month or so, we know the company will have been very busy with their Q4 earnings, which are due out after market today, and ultimately that would have been their focus. The timeline I would expect, if this goes ahead, is in the space of around 6 to 12 months we would start to see more. However, it's important to closely follow the news, and I'll do that, and any rumours we hear, of course, I'll keep you updated. Now, the one other important consideration here is around the recent market volatility. Now, I do have a separate series of videos coming out on this addressing why the market has been so volatile, why government bond yields are increasing and why there is this fear of inflation, because the other videos I've seen about this on YouTube haven't done a great job to date, don't explain why, and don't explain as investors what the opportunities for us are and how we can hedge our portfolio and be best positioned against these. If you're interested in those kind of videos, they will be coming to the channel very shortly, so keep an eye out for those. So I have said this a number of times, but for me, personally, this is a long-term investment opportunity, and I believe that if you're investing in this sector, you probably should have a similar time horizon. It's not overnight that the regulatory status of cannabis changes. It's not overnight that the company can deliver on its growth strategy. It all takes time. I have strong conviction in the growth plan and the strategy of management, and so I have confidence in this long term. Of course, I'll keep a close eye on the news and developments and make sure that the fundamental underlying investment thesis doesn't change. But ultimately, I'm not going to be looking at the price of this on a daily basis. I've invested at a price I'm comfortable with, and I have long-term conviction on that. If you're not prepared to hold this long-term, then I question whether an investment in this sector is appropriate for you, or alternatively, if you are invested in this for the long term, but you're looking at the price movements on it daily, then you're just going to stress yourself out unduly. Have conviction in your investment thesis, and be patient. So, now on to the important question. Why does HITID want to do this, and what are the positives and what are the negatives? Well, ultimately, the rationale can be distilled into three main reasons. Now, the first of those is around attracting new investors, both retail and institutional. Being listed on the NASDAQ gives you a much broader, diverse universe of potential investors than being listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange. For retail investors, sometimes there's massive fees and charges when you're investing into alternative exchanges, and that's not the same for the NASDAQ. More importantly, however, there's a big universe of institutional investors who can't invest in stocks when they're OTC. That means, through uplisting to the NASDAQ, those investors, many of whom may be invested in other cannabis-related stocks which are listed on the NASDAQ and other main markets, would then be able to invest into HITID as well. Again, that's good news and should drive positive price action. Now, the second potential reason is around potential momentum. There's total index funds that invest into the NASDAQ. So ultimately, when a new company is listed on the NASDAQ, those total index funds have to invest in those companies as well. That means once the uplisting is completed for HITID, these total index funds will, in relation to the rest of the market, have to acquire shares in HITID as well. Again, this positive momentum and buy pressure should have a positive impact on the valuation. Now, the final reason, and this is quite specific for HITID, is in relation to its US expansion plans. Now, we do know with HITID, a large component of their future growth is by expanding into the US market. Now, this is something which a lot of people have asked me about, and I'm working on bringing out a video focused purely on the US growth opportunity and the potential challenges that are faced with this. However, there's the real potential that having a NASDAQ listing could be very helpful in enabling HITID to secure the relevant licenses and being compliant with the relative regulation that may be put in place as more legalization occurs across the US. This perhaps is also a very important dynamic and shouldn't be disregarded. So, what are the negatives and what are the things that we as investors should be aware of? Now, the first of those is that the NASDAQ typically does have more rigorous filing requirements than other stock exchanges, and the Toronto Stock Exchange being an example of that. This may mean there's greater financial disclosure required, and ultimately ensuring that the company is compliant and in line with new to the company rules, regulations and codes. The other thing we should definitely be aware of is the fact that listing on the NASDAQ does have greater costs associated with it as well. Typically, main markets and the more reputable markets do have higher listing costs than your smaller OTC markets. As part of this, you also need to consider the ancillary costs in relation to this. You may need a new auditor, for example. You may need new advisors, lawyers, PR, all these things. All of them ultimately are additional costs and things that we need to be aware of that the company may be incurring. Now, all of this said, I have one final thing for you, and it's a reminder. It's a reminder for patience. Now, I do feel like a broken record repeating myself again and again on this. However, I'm seeing a massive number of people who are looking at the price daily and unduly worrying themselves. This is not a company which overnight will deliver on its growth strategy, and overnight the whole regulatory landscape is not going to change. It takes time. Either you have a conviction and a belief that that strategy will play out, and you should be confident in waiting for the long term, or alternatively, you don't believe in that, and perhaps this is not the right investment for you. This is a small cap, volatile growth penny stock. In the next few days, I will release videos explaining exactly what's going on in the market, why this is happening, and what it means for us. However, as long-term investors, we do not need to be unduly worried by this. If you believe in the thesis, you believe in the business, you believe in the management team, and you believe in the strategy, then long-term, you can have confidence in your investment. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please smash the like button. If you're new to the channel and you like investing related content, then hit that subscribe button. If you like this sort of content and you want to see more, then check out the Patreon. And as always, please let me know your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. I find it so interesting hearing everyone's different perspectives and opinions, so please get involved. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video.